Well, I went into my first library when I was around about 17, and it was so frightening because the librarian was a very, very grey-haired lady, and she was down there, you know, and so to get to her you had to walk, and she could look at you all the way you were going down. And so my experience of libraries was, at the time, was that it was a very, very special place, and a place that you had to make sure that you were reverent in. So, but since then, of course, libraries have always been important for me as a writer. They are where I research, they're where I get my ideas from, my stimulation. When I was a young student, I used to come into the Wellington City Library and marvel at the world's treasures, because basically libraries are whare taonga, filled with the wisdom and the imaginative renderings of so many important writers from around the world. And it was also a place where I could actually see writers like Jackie Sturm, who was at that time working in the New Zealand part of the Wellington Central Library. In those days my major haunt was that section of books which involved like Wilkie Collins's The Moonstone, and The Woman in White, and the books by Thomas Hardy and by Charles Dickens, of course. But there was one guilty pleasure that I always had, and that was the work of H. Rider Haggard. And in those days the library had this kind of book. And the reason why I really liked H. Rider Haggard was not only because of the exciting romances that he wrote, but because the books were so beautiful. And this was a MacDonald illustrated edition, and every chapter had a heading on it, like an early Christian ceremony, or the head of the Ethiopian, And they also had these wonderful, wonderful illustrations which you now do not see in books. Absolutely fantastic illustrations throughout. So this one was, he was still on his feet, but in the centre of a surging mass of struggling men. And this one here has always been a personal favourite. This one here. And it's captioned, "Curse her, may she be everlastingly cursed." Well, the book, of course, is She, by H. Rider Haggard. And he was the author of other romances that I really devoured in those days, called Montezuma's Daughter, or Alan Quatermain, Nada the Lily, and Eric Bright Eyes. But I particularly responded to She because of its hugely imaginative reconstruction of an Egyptian civilization in the middle of Africa, ruled by a beautiful and eternal woman. And because of the imaginative construction of it, that kind of set my own imagination running as well, because in many ways Māori were also a kingdom within another kingdom, except that it was a reversal. Instead of being an Egyptian kingdom within black Africa, it was a Māori kingdom within white New Zealand. So in many ways one can trace The Matriarch, which is a novel that a lot of people know of mine, as being a kind of reversal of the polarities. In that particular novel I had a Māori woman who was absolutely beautiful, like Aisha in the novel by H. Rider Haggard, She. And as in H. Rider Haggard's novel, my heroine is also a chieftainess wanting to maintain her particular sovereignty within this wider kingdom. And she too is eternal in my memory, my grandmother Riripeti, but also eternal in the sense that she has a wish to maintain her kingdom, which is the kingdom of Māori people in New Zealand. So she was a very, very great inspiration to me. One of the other reasons why I liked H. Rider Haggard's work was because in many ways his career and mine were quite similar, and in fact he was able to write very quickly. He wrote this particular novel in 2 months. I think that I was kind of inspired by the fact that one could write a novel in 2 months. Also, he was a person who liked to keep the narrative going, and so often I would read H. Rider Haggard and think about Slopogas. I would think about Aisha. I would think about these characters as being Māori characters, not at all Egyptian or European characters.